September 2025. The announcement cracked across the news like thunder. The United States suspends all immigration from Burkina Faso within hours. More than 12,000 Burkinab citizens in America workers, families, and over 5,000 students were thrown into limbo. Airports swelled with confusion. At JFK, young arrivals were halted mid-step, their visas suddenly void. In Houston, construction crews were told their permits would vanish in weeks. And in Washington, protesters filled the streets with placards that read, "We are not collateral, we are human." President Ibrahim Traoré's response was immediate and unflinching. "This is not policy. This is punishment. It is tyranny disguised as law, and it is an insult to Africa." His words ignited a fire. From Ouagadougou to Niamey, from Bamako to New York, demonstrations erupted. Flags waved, chants rolled through city squares. The message was the same: Africa will not bow. Western headlines called it another Trump shock. But behind closed doors, diplomats whispered of a hidden play not about borders, but about resources, leverage, and control. What was unfolding was more than a policy dispute. It was the opening battle of a struggle where visas, oil, and gold would collide, forcing Africa to choose between submission and sovereignty. The decree struck like a hammer. Within hours, chaos rippled across to continents. At airports, students wept openly as they called families back home. In dormitories, young men and women packed their belongings, unsure if tomorrow meant deportation. Mothers clutched children tighter at immigration offices, waiting for answers that never came. The numbers revealed the scale. More than 12,000 Burkinab directly hit 5,300 of them students. But statistics could not capture the dread. Fear hung in classrooms, in worksites, in every uncertain knock at the door. Back in Ouagadougou, the news landed like a thunderclap. Crowds swarmed outside the U.S. Embassy, hoisting signs scrawled by hand. "We are not criminals. We are students." Radio lines burned with callers denouncing the move as economic blackmail. In Mali and Niger, solidarity marches filled the squares, voices rising in defiance. Traoré addressed his nation the next day. His voice was sharp, resolute. "This is not immigration policy. It is punishment. It is tyranny disguised as law. And it is an insult to Africa." His speech electrified the streets. Citizens banged pots from balconies. Students lifted flags. Miners abandoned shafts to join protests. For many, this was no longer about visas, it was about dignity. International reaction was swift. The African Union convened an emergency session, condemning the suspension as discriminatory. European commentators questioned the wisdom of targeting a country with so small a migrant flow. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump doubled down. At a rally, he thundered, "If they want access to our markets, they will respect our rules." His words drew roars of applause from supporters, broadcast across U.S. screens. But in Africa, the same clip was replayed with fury, feeding a storm that was only beginning. By week's end, the crisis had grown far beyond immigration. It had become a test of sovereignty, of how far a superpower could go to bend a small nation to its will. Burkina Faso stood at the center of the storm, and Traoré, once dismissed as a fiery but isolated figure, was now a rallying point for millions. The White House briefing was brisk, almost casual. Officials framed the suspension as a matter of national security and migration control. But the scope was staggering. Not only were new visas frozen, thousands already in the United States were told their legal status would soon vanish. Students, workers, and families awaiting reunification were all caught in a countdown with no clear end. At first glance, it seemed like another hardline immigration move consistent with Trump's past rhetoric. But within days, journalists and diplomats began to ask the obvious question: why target Burkina Faso, a country with virtually no mass migration to America? Why now? The answer came through a leak. A European newspaper obtained a classified memo circulated between the U.S. State Department and the National Security Council. Its language was stark. African student networks in the United States are being leveraged to support independent financial and political strategies driven by Ibrahim Traoré and allied Sahel states. Immediate containment is required. The memo went further, linking Burkinab student associations to online campaigns exposing IMF contracts, protesting resource seizures, and criticizing Western trade policies. To Washington, this wasn't activism, it was infiltration. Buried halfway down the page was a chilling line. Visa leverage provides bargaining power over extractive concessions. Priority, gold and oil. For Traoré, it confirmed what he already suspected. The ban had nothing to do with terrorism, drugs, or jobs. It was economic blackmail, an attempt to choke his nation until it surrendered its resources. Ouagadougou moved quickly. A crisis task force was formed to document how many citizens were at risk, especially students stranded in American universities. Parents flooded government hotlines with desperate questions. Will my son be deported? Will my daughter's degree be wasted? Traoré addressed the nation with fury. They want to turn our children into hostages. They want to make our youth collateral for their greed. But Africa's future is not a bargaining chip. His words echoed in the streets. In Ouagadougou, students marched under banners declaring, "Education is not a crime." In Bamako and Niamey, solidarity crowds swelled. Even in Washington, Burkinab students staged sit-ins, refusing to leave campuses quietly. Their American classmates joined them, chanting, "Let them learn." Meanwhile, US officials dug in their heels. At a rally, Trump declared, "We will not let tiny nations use our country as a base to undermine us. If they want our markets, they will respect our terms." The crowd roared, but abroad, the remark landed like an admission. What the memo implied, Trump had spoken aloud. This was not immigration control, it was economic coercion in disguise. Diplomats across Africa took note. Leaders who once dismissed Traoré as a reckless firebrand now recognized a broader pattern. First the seized gold, then the IMF's collateral clauses, and now visas as weapons. The strategy was unmistakable: make Africa pay for independence. Inside the United Nations, African delegations demanded answers. Since when is education a threat to global security? One ambassador asked. No reply came. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré convened his advisors. Options flew across the table: protest at the UN, recall ambassadors, strike emergency deals with alternative partners. Some urged restraint. We cannot isolate ourselves, one minister warned. But Traoré cut him off. They have already isolated us. The question is not whether we stand alone. The question is whether we stand with dignity. His words stiffened the room. Reports soon surfaced that Moscow and Beijing had quietly reached out, offering scholarships and work visas to students expelled from America. The signal was unmistakable. If Washington wanted to close doors, others were ready to open them. For Trump, the visa freeze was designed as a pressure tactic. Instead, it sparked a storm. Burkina Faso's crisis was rapidly becoming Africa's cause, and what began as an immigration dispute was mutating into something far more dangerous: a geopolitical showdown over sovereignty, resources, and the future of a continent. The crisis quickly outgrew Burkina Faso's borders. Within days of Trump's September 2025 announcement, shockwaves rippled across the Sahel. In Bamako, Mali's capital, hundreds of students poured into the streets, marching toward the US embassy. Their chants thundered through the city. If you deport them, deport us all. In Niamey, Niger's parliament erupted in heated debate as opposition leaders accused Washington of wielding visas as economic weapons and warned that the Sahel would not be treated like a cluster of colonies. The symbolism was clear: an attack on one was an attack on all. Images of defiance spread quickly. At Howard University in Washington, Burkinab students staged a two-day sit-in, draping banners across the campus lawn. We are scholars, not pawns. Their American classmates joined in solidarity, chanting alongside them. On Pennsylvania Avenue, protesters gathered opposite the White House, carrying placards in both French and English. Education is not a crime. Africa is not collateral. For the first time, ordinary Americans were confronted with the faces of young Africans caught in the middle of a geopolitical clash. Back home, Traoré turned the crisis into a rallying cry. In a nationwide address broadcast across every radio and phone in Burkina Faso, his words cut deep. They thought they could break us by targeting our children abroad. Instead, they have united us. Africa is not a land of subjects. We are partners or we are nothing at all. The line raced across the continent faster than any decree. Within hours, the hashtag we are not collateral exploded on social media, from Dar es Salaam to Johannesburg. In South Africa, student unions held solidarity vigils. In Ghana, activists projected Traoré's speech onto the walls of Accra's Independence Arch. The immigration freeze meant to isolate Burkina Faso had instead awakened an entire continent. But the backlash was not confined to the streets. Diplomacy itself became a battlefield. Rumors swirled that U.S. envoys quietly offered certain African governments secret deals. Distance yourselves from Traoré, and your students' visas will be spared. It was the old imperial playbook of divide and rule. Some leaders hesitated, others remained silent, but the maneuver did not go unnoticed. In Ouagadougou's cafes, people joked bitterly.